Does your G05 X5 constantly need coolant? Well, my name's Cole from FCP Euro, and today we're going to be showing you how to replace the water pump on your N63 equipped G05 X5. In front of me, I have the thermostat and water pump kit for the N63 equipped G05 X5. Now, this kit comes with the water pump, the thermostat, a new drive belt, all the seals we're going to need, all the one-time use hardware, a specialty tool for the drive belt tensioner, and the Zurich HT12 coolant. We chose this kit because this is OE parts. This means that these are the parts that come on your vehicle from the factory. This is a genuine water pump by BMW, and the thermostat is made by Waller, which is the manufacturer that makes it for BMW. The water pump on the N63 engines do not have a service interval by BMW. However, here at FCP Euro, we've seen these water pumps fail anywhere from 60 to 100,000 miles. Now, the thermostats are more prone to leaking on these N63 engines. However, when you remove the water pump, you have to remove the thermostat as well, so might as well replace it while it's out. Some indications that you may need to replace your water pump and thermostat include a grinding noise from the engine bay, coolant leaks, a check engine light, poor engine cooling performance, and no heat in the cabin. With all of that, let's jump into the tools we're going to need for this DIY. We'll need an arrangement of sockets including an 18mm, 16mm, 10mm, 8mm, and 6mm. We'll need a couple specialty sockets including a T60, T40, E12, and E8. An assortment of ratchets and different length extensions, and torque wrenches ranging from 8 Newton meters all the way up to 56 Newton meters. An assortment of different prying tools, different size flathead screwdrivers, and some 90-degree picks. Needle nose pliers, trim panel popper tools. Optionally, to make the job a lot easier, we have some electric ratchets here and an electric screwdriver. And lastly, a coolant vacuum system filling tool. Now that we've gone over all the tools that we're going to need, let's get into replacing this water pump. Before we hop underneath the hood, we're going to have to deactivate the air suspension in our X5 if your vehicle is equipped with it. To do that, we're going to press the start-stop button 3 times quickly. You'll see there's a couple messages on the dash, a couple blinks, and then it'll say diagnostic mode active. Once we see that message, we're going to press down on this air suspension switch for 7 seconds and then release. Once you see that light turn off on the level setting, that means that we are in service mode for the air suspension. Now let's turn off the ignition and hop underneath the hood. Now that we're here, we're going to start removing all of the plastic trim panels so we can start disassembling the engine bay to access the thermostat. To remove this trim panel, we're going to need a trim removal tool or a flathead screwdriver will do. This definitely makes the job easier. We're going to get underneath the top portion of this plastic rivet, pop it up, and then remove the whole rivet itself. We're going to remove the 6 plastic rivets per side and then move over to the driver's side. Up top by the cowl, there's going to be 2 more rivets per side that we're going to have to remove. On the passenger side, we're going to want to flip open the washer fluid cap and then take a small screwdriver and depress the tab, holding it on, and then remove it by sliding it forward and pulling it out. Before we fully remove these panels, we're going to have to pop this rubber strip out of the plastic piece. And if you look closely down here, you'll see all these little plastic clips that hold this rubber seal onto the plastic trim piece. So we'll just get underneath of it and slowly pry them up. There will be 3 of these clips that we have to remove per side, and then we can pull these panels out. We can now fish these covers out of the engine bay. Now, before removing this panel completely, we're going to have to release the clips on the hood cable bracket. To do that, we'll take a pair of needle nose pliers and slightly pinch these clips to collapse them, and then we can push it through. To continue to disassemble all of the braces in the engine bay, we're going to need an 18mm socket, a long extension is handy, and then we have an electric ratchet, a normal ratchet will do, but we're going to want to remove these one-time use bolts, and there's going to be 6 of them that hold these cross braces on. With those 6 bolts removed, we can remove the upper 2 strut braces. And before we remove these two front cross braces, we'll take an E12 socket and remove these two screws. We're going to want to remove all the wiring from this cross brace, so we'll take a trim tool here, slide it underneath this wiring holder, and remove it. Starting to remove all of the hardware on this cross brace, we'll take a T40 socket and remove these bolts. Take a 15mm socket and remove the 4 top bolts. With all the bolts now removed, we can slide this cross brace back a little bit and fish it out. We'll now pop this cable out of its holders and remove the 7 T40 bolts holding this cover on. Now we can slide this panel out of the way. At this point, let's raise the vehicle, disassemble some things underneath so we can start to drain the coolant. We're going to remove the 16 8mm screws to remove this plastic belly pan. Before draining the coolant, we're going to want to remove the coolant reservoir cap. Now, these newer BMWs do not have a coolant drain screw on the bottom of the radiator, so we're going to use a big hook to come up and release the lower radiator hose from the thermostat assembly. So we'll take our pick here, fish it up into the engine bay, and come over and remove one side of the clip. There it is. It's a good idea to remove this clip completely because if it's still installed, sometimes it can catch and not allow you to remove that coolant hose easily. Now that we have this removed, we're going to set it aside and remove the rest of the hose from the thermostat and drain the coolant. The best way to reach in and grab that coolant hose is going to be on the passenger side in between the frame rail and the sway bar. So we're just going to reach in here, grab it, and start giving it a tug. We're going to let the coolant drain out of this vehicle down to a drip, and then we're going to go back up top to start disassembling even further. We're going to start removing some items so we can remove the fan assembly. Since all the coolant is removed, we can start taking some of these coolant lines off to make it a little bit easier to access some stuff down below. We just pop this top clip off and we can remove this coolant line. Setting that coolant line aside, it's a good idea to remove this electrical connector here. Taking our pick, we're going to remove this clamp on the upper radiator hose, take it off, and disconnect the hose. There we go. We'll take our pick and remove the clip on this coolant fitting right underneath the upper coolant fitting, and then disconnect this connection. Sometimes a pry bar can be used to gently pry the fitting off. There we go. Coming down here, we'll take our pick again, remove this clip. Taking our pick, we'll get right underneath here on this wire holder and then remove it. With that hose now disconnected, we can push it backwards and tuck it underneath to give us a little bit more access. At this point, we need to remove the auxiliary water pump from the fan shroud itself. So we'll take a pick, come back here and unclip this. It's very tight, but we'll show you in a second, and then remove the electrical connector once this pump is out and free. This is the tab that we're gonna have to depress and then pull upward with the pump to remove it from the radiator fans. Now over on the passenger side, we can push this wiring grommet out of the fans, release the connector. There's one more wiring connector down below that we're gonna wanna move the lock to the unlock position on it with our pick, slightly press down and remove. Now with those two electrical connectors disconnected, we can take this harness and tuck it off to the side. Now we're just going to continue to remove all these coolant connector clips and remove the coolant hoses. Since we already removed the lower coolant hose from the thermostat, once we disconnect it from the radiator, we can actually pull the hose all the way up and out. Down below the lower radiator hose, there's going to be another coolant pump that we're going to have to release the clip just like the other side, pull up, and set it to the side. With the electrical connectors removed on the passenger side, we will press down on this tab right here, shimmy it up, move over to the driver's side and do the same. With those two tabs now released, we can come here with a flat screwdriver or a pick, remove this holder for this coolant hose. Now with everything unclipped, we're going to start removing the fans. Be sure to be cautious of all the coolant hoses and wiring connectors down there, and we don't tug and break anything. Now with the radiator fans removed, we have a piece of cardboard here that we cut from one of our FCP Euro boxes, and this is just going to get slid right down into the radiator area to protect it. Okay. Now we can start removing the engine cover here and pulling all the intake parts off to remove the passenger side charge cooler. Now we'll come over to the oxygen sensor connectors and disconnect them. As you can see, some of the plastic in the engine bay is very fragile, so just take your time when removing some of the electrical connectors. You may break some of the holders, and we'll show you how to fix that later. Now with the oxygen sensor connectors removed, we can fish all of this wiring out of their holders and lay it up top. We'll do that with the same on the driver's side. With a 6mm socket or a flathead screwdriver, we're going to want to loosen the clamps for the intake. Before we can remove the rest of this air box, we're going to have to remove the air intake pipes down below. And the way that we're going to do that is pinch the connection on both sides, here down by the radiator. It is very, very tight. As you can see, I am wrestling this out. Now with the front side of this air duct out, we can take a pick, get right underneath here, and pull it out. With the passenger side duct removed, we're going to repeat that process on the driver's side. This side is a little bit more complicated because there's some coolant hoses here. It might be a good idea to release this coolant hose here with a clip on the reservoir, and that is just to give you a little bit more room. Now with all of our connections on the air box itself, either loosened or removed, we can pull the air box off the grommets that it is attached to, and we're going to be doing that by just giving it some good force, pulling upwards. It may be challenging because it's deep inside the engine bay, but they are on rubber grommets. Once the air box is loose, we're going to want to fish these wires down through the hole so we can remove the actual air box. With our air box now removed, we can come over with a pair of needle nose pliers and remove these safety clips on the turbo discharge pipe. Now, these are installed from the factory. They're really a pain to get off, and be careful. They're very small, so they may fling out, but work these off. Try not to bend them too much because they can be reused. If you bend them to a point where you can't reuse them and you can't bend them back, it's okay, they're not essential. There's gonna be two of them, so we're gonna come over on the other side of the driver's side discharge hose and remove it. And with our 90-degree hose pick, we can come underneath this clamp and remove it completely to be able to remove this discharge hose from the turbo. This is quite stiff, so some brute force is going to be needed. There we go. For easier access, we're just going to pull this hose out of the way. We're going to want to remove this fresh air inlet pipe from the turbo, so we can pull this clip off here on the breather connection, set it aside, pull that connection off of this, just like this. Once that is now loose, we can come back with our 90-degree pick, remove the clip on the turbo inlet pipe, and now we can pull this whole pipe out. We're going to come up to this junction here, press this blue locking tab upwards, and disconnect from that line. Come back to this purge solenoid, depress this clip right here, and pull that bracket off. With that now disconnected, we'll come over to this small front coolant tank and pop the line out of the holder. We want to make sure that this is loose and able to move. With a 10mm socket and a ratchet, we'll come over to this crossover hose, remove these two bolts, and pull this hose out of the passenger side charge cooler. With a 90-degree pick, we'll come down to this electrical connector here, release the lock, and then pull off this electrical connector. Be careful, this is a very hot part of the engine bay, so this can be very fragile. Make sure you have a drain pan underneath the vehicle because we're going to take this coolant fitting off right here from the charge cooler. So using a 90-degree pick, remove this clip and pull this coolant hose off of the charge cooler. We're going to want to pop this coolant line out of this fitting and push it to the side. Be careful, we don't want to break that plastic. And then come down with a 10mm socket and a ratchet and remove this bolt. We can bend this up slightly, very gently, to give us a little bit more room. Taking our 90-degree pick again, coming down to this clip that holds on the charge cooler to the throttle body, and we're going to remove it. We are now going to fish the charge cooler up and backwards. Be very careful of all these plastic lines and wires. We don't want to catch on anything. And speaking of plastic, there is one more coolant fitting that we have to remove here on the back side. The coolant hose is right here, so we'll take our 90-degree pick, pull this clip off, and then remove the coolant hose. And now the driver's side's charge cooler can come out. Now we're going to move this front coolant reservoir forward a little bit, so we'll come back here, disconnect this electric wiring from its holder. With a 90-degree pick, we'll come down here, slide it in to that little spot. Then with your other hand, slowly push it forward a little bit, and then come over to the driver's side and do the same. Now we can slide this forward and give us a little bit more room. With this coolant tank now unclipped from the engine, since we removed the two coolant hoses from the charge cooler, we can actually slide this down the engine bay and push it out of the way. Now, before removing our drive belt here, it's a good idea to take our phone and take a picture where the drive belt is routed. So when we come back to install the new belt later, we don't have to question if the belt is routed right. With a T60 socket, we're gonna come down here into the engine bay and start to detension the serpentine belt. Now in the kit is included this tool for the tensioner. We're gonna take our ratchet, tension this belt, and then come in with our lock tool here. We're going to start removing the belt by sliding it off of the water pump pulley. Since this is a smooth pulley, it's going to be the easiest to get off. We just continue to unwrap this belt and remove it from the vehicle. With a 90-degree pick, we'll come down and remove the clip off of this coolant hose right on the front of the water pump and then remove the hose. With our 90-degree pick, we'll get right underneath of this little holder. These are very brittle because this is a very hot part of the engine bay, so just be careful. As you can see, I'm being very careful here and I still broke one of the tabs. Now with that unclipped, we can take this wire and break the connector completely. With our 10mm socket, we're going to remove this bolt. With that bolt removed, we can now wiggle this hard line out of the water pump. With a T30 socket, in this case we have a half cut bit on a ratchet, we're going to come underneath here and remove this one bolt holding this plastic coolant fitting on. Now we can slide this plastic coolant fitting out of the water pump. With an E8 socket and a ratchet, we're now going to remove the 5 water pump bolts. Be careful not to drop the water pump because there's 2 electrical connectors that we need to disconnect before removing it. Now that all 5 bolts are removed, we can take a pry bar down here and gently pry the water pump off. Now remember, we have 2 more electrical connectors that we're going to have to disconnect before we can take this out completely. With a little bit more room, we can now come and disconnect this electrical connector on the top of the thermostat and rotate it. And now come in with a small 90-degree pick to release this electrical connector and put it to the side. It's okay if you snap that tab off because the new water pump has a new connector. Now to remove this clip on the turbo outlet hose, we're gonna have to take a 90-degree pick right here, pop off this retaining clip. There's gonna be one on both sides, and this is just to hold that clip down, and we'll pop these back in later. Now with those 2 safety clips removed, we can pull the passenger side turbo outlet clip off and remove the hose from the turbo. Take your 90-degree pick again and remove this clip, and then remove the connection. Now the last connection we have to remove is removing this clip down on the turbo inlet and pulling that inlet pipe off. Since we are removing this charge cooler, we're going to want to start disconnecting all the electrical connectors and surrounding items to remove this assembly. So we're just taking the electrical connector off of this purge solenoid here. Now with this plug removed, we'll take a pick or a flathead screwdriver, get underneath here and start pushing this rubber grommet off of this tab. Now with the vacuum solenoid disconnected, we can unclip it from the coolant tank in the front here. Coming back over to this bracket, someone else has been in here, so this is actually coming off of the vehicle because one of the clips is broken. However, we can actually remove this whole bracket from underneath. It's a bit tricky, but it's definitely easier with this removed from the bracket. But now that that bracket's free, we can take our 90-degree pick, come in that spot, release that clip, and pull this plastic bracket out altogether. Now, working our way down, we'll remove this electrical connector by pushing the lock downwards. This can be a little difficult. Sometimes a pick definitely aids in this. Now, as you can see, I was super gentle with trying to get that locking tab off that connector, and we can reinstall that locking tab. However, as long as you don't break the other locking portion of it, you can reconnect that connector. So if that happens to you, you can always take a pick and gently press up on that tab so we can remove this connector. Now we'll grab a 90-degree pick and remove this clip on the coolant fitting here and remove the fitting. With a 10mm socket, we'll remove these 2 screws to pull this fitting off. Be careful, this is plastic, so we're just going to want to wiggle this out and be gentle. Now coming over to this coolant line, we're going to want to pull up a little bit, push it over to the side, grab a 10mm socket, and remove this screw. We're now going to come down to the lower part of the charge cooler and take this wiring harness and push it over to the side so we can come down with a 90-degree hook and remove this clip. Before we can remove the charge cooler, one last coolant hose, we're just going to pop out of its holder here. Now we can take the charge cooler and slide it upwards, tilt it back a little bit, take a 90-degree pick to remove this last coolant hose. Pull the clip off and then wiggle that hose off. We will now remove this full charge cooler out. Now there is the thermostat. It took a little bit to get to, but we now have access with the passenger side charge cooler removed. So we'll come down here and disconnect the electrical connector on the thermostat. And with a E8 socket with an extension, we can come down and remove the 3 bolts on the thermostat. Now, before we install our new thermostat, we're going to want to check the water pump housing to make sure the old seal did not stick to it. In our case, it did. So we're going to remove this, make sure that mating surface is clean, and now install the new thermostat. With our new thermostat in our hand, we can see that the new seal is already pre-installed on the thermostat. Now with our new thermostat, we're going to lower it down into the engine bay and mate it to the water pump housing. We're going to want to make sure that the connector is facing upwards. Then we'll take one of the 3 bolts and thread it in by hand. Once the threads are started, it's definitely easier to take the socket and extension without a ratchet on here and just continue to thread these bolts in until the thermostat is flush with the water pump housing. Once all of these bolts are flush and hand tight, we're going to come back with our torque wrench and torque these to 10 Newton meters. With that all tight, we can take our connector here for the thermostat and plug it back in. Before reinstalling the passenger side charge cooler, we're going to want to take a look at this lower seal here on the assembly itself. And it isn't required to replace this at this time. However, it's a really good idea to change it out now because we would have to go through all the steps to change it again. Now, this seal is to seal all of the air that goes onto this charge cooler, and it can wear out over time, so we're just going to replace it now. And this seal is going to be linked in the description below. This seal is directional, so we're going to want to make sure that the taper goes downwards towards the inside of the charge cooler, not like this. So we'll just take it and slide it into this groove here and run our finger around to make sure that it is properly seated. With the new steel installed, we're just going to clean around the area to make sure there's no debris in there, and then take a finger coated with oil and lightly lubricate the seal with engine oil. Now we can reinstall our clip here and install the charge cooler into the engine bay. Now, before dropping the charge cooler down here, we're going to want to reinstall our clips on the 2 coolant fittings for the charge cooler. Now, with the passenger side charge cooler, we're going to fish it down there, but do not click it in yet. Once it is down in position, we will grab this lower cooling fitting and reinstall it onto the charge cooler. Make sure you hear that audible click. Now we can tilt this charge cooler back while making sure we're not going to pinch any wires, and press down. We want to make sure this charge cooler is locked in place, so giving it a little tug up and down to make sure it's not going anywhere. Now we're going to want to clip this coolant hose into its holder here and route the other coolant fitting underneath and clip it into place. We're going to want to come down and make sure the block is free of debris and the sealing surface is clean. Since it's easier to do this out of the car, we're going to take a little bit of coolant on our finger and just rub it over all of the connections. Lowering this down into the engine bay, we're going to want to connect all of the electrical connectors before mating it to the block. We're going to connect the electrical connector on the back first. Click that into place, make sure it won't come out, and then take the connector for the thermostat and click it in. We're going to tilt the water pump with the bottom portion past the crankshaft vibration dampener, and then slide the water pump over the dowel on the top left bolt. Now we're going to take the longest water pump bolt and thread it in by hand. We're going to take the second longest water pump bolt and thread it into this spot. Using an E8 Torx socket and an extension, we're going to take the 3 lower water pump bolts and thread them in. With our E8 socket, an extension, and our torque wrench set to 10 Newton meters, we're going to tighten all the bolts on the water pump. We'll start with the 2 up top and then work our way down. We're gonna wanna clean these fittings to make sure that they do not have any kind of debris on them, and then take a little bit of coolant on our hand and just rub it on the fitting so it slides in a little bit easier. We're gonna position this top one and then slide it in. Now we're gonna push this bottom coolant hose into the water pump. This one is a little tricky because there's not really an area to grab, but with some wiggle, we'll get it in. Taking the T30 bolt, we are going to thread it back into this position by hand and torque it down to 8 Newton meters. Taking this 10 millimeter bolt, we're going to reinstall it into the coolant hard line and torque this down to 8 Newton meters. We're going to come down here and reinstall the wire to this holder. Ours broke, so we're going to take a little zip tie here to secure it down. Now, taking the new belt provided in the kit, we're going to follow this graphic here to show us how to route this belt. So we're just going to come all the way down first and wrap it around the crankshaft. Then we'll go around the tensioner. Then we'll go up above, up to the alternator. You're going to have to remove it from one of the pulleys to get it all the way on. But we are almost there. There we go. Taking our T60 socket and ratchet, we're gonna come down here, reinstall it into the belt tensioner, apply a little bit of tension and remove that pin and release the tensioner. We're gonna now take our lower coolant radiator hose and we're gonna take a little bit of coolant on our finger and just lubricate all of these O-rings. Now we will reinstall these clips back onto the coolant hoses. It's easier to put the clips back on out of the car. Now taking this hose with the engine side facing down, we're gonna just slide this back into the engine bay and reconnect it on the thermostat first. And then we'll just push it on. Make sure it clicks, give it a little tug, and make sure that clip is all the way in. Once that's clipped in, we're going to want to make sure the hose is properly routed close to the fitting on the radiator. Now taking this coolant tank, we're going to route it back up and reconnect this coolant line right here. Now with all of this lubricated, we're going to take our clip here, reinstall it back onto the coolant hose, and then clip it back in. Listen for that audible click, and then give it a little tug to make sure it won't come out. Now we're gonna reach down here and reinstall this reservoir onto its mounts. We're just gonna slide it back and clip it in. Now we're just gonna push this wire into the holder. Now with our driver's side charge cooler, we're gonna wanna inspect this lower seal and make sure there aren't any tears or that the seal is compromised. Since this charge cooler is a little bit challenging to get out, we are going to do some preventative maintenance and renew this seal. We're gonna take a 90-degree pick, get underneath of it right here, pull it out, take the new seal. This is directional, so make sure it goes in the correct way as the last one came out. And we're just gonna work this in, use our hand to press it into that groove, make sure it's seating nicely, and then take a little bit of engine oil on our finger and lightly coat that seal so it's gonna slip on a little bit easier. Before we drop this charge cooler back down into place, we'll take the clip that holds it on and reinstall it back onto the connection right here. Now, when dropping this down, we don't want to fully connect it first because we want to connect the coolant line on the back side. So we're just going to fish this down here into the engine bay, loosely around where it's going to sit. Now, taking this coolant hose here, we're going to pull it forward towards the radiator, grab a little bit of coolant on our finger, lubricate that seal down there, and then take the clip for it and reinstall it. We're going to take this coolant hose, route it behind all the other ones here, and then plug it into the charge cooler. And we're just going to do a little tug on this coolant hose here to make sure it's not going to come off the charge cooler. We're gonna now press downward, lift this coolant line over here, and push down until we hear that click. Make sure that clip is all the way pushed in, and give the charge cooler a little tug to make sure it's not gonna come out. Once that bolt is tight, we can come over here and push this coolant line down into its bracket. Just like that lower charge fitting O-ring, we're gonna want to inspect this seal right here that goes into the other charge cooler to make sure there's no tears or cracks or anything. Just for safety, we're gonna replace this seal because it's a part anyway. All these seals can be found at scpeuro.com. Taking the new seal here, we'll just get it in that groove and roll it on. Taking a little bit of oil on our finger, we'll just wipe it around that seal for a little bit of lubrication and then reinstall it into the charge cooler. Using a 10mm socket, we are going to thread these bolts into the charge cooler and torque them down to 8 Nm. We can now reclip this line into the holders. At this point, we can lubricate the O-ring for this coolant hose with some coolant on our finger, reinstall this clip, and connect it back onto the charge cooler. There we go. We can now take this bracket, reclip it back onto the charge cooler, and make sure that everything is sitting nicely. Now we're gonna come up here and reconnect this and push down on the blue tab. Give it a little tug, make sure it's not going anywhere. Now taking the connector and we're gonna slide it down, push it on, wait for that click, and then push in the lock. Now in the kit there is a new seal for this intake air pipe, so we're gonna take a 90-degree pick and gently remove the old seal. You can just get underneath there like that, work the way out, work its way out, and then grab the new seal that's provided, and in this orientation, position the seal into the channel within the pipe. Once it's dropped down in there, we want to make sure that it is fully seated in that channel. Grab a dab of engine oil on our finger and just slightly lubricate that seal. With that seal now installed, we'll take our clip for this pipe, reinstall it onto the pipe, and clip it into place. Want to make sure that clip is all the way pressed down and give it a little tug. Now taking a little bit of oil on our finger, we'll lubricate the seal in this breather pipe and then reinstall this clip and push on the connection. Now we're going to want to take a look at this seal inside of this turbo discharge pipe and inspect for any cracks or tears. It all looks good, so we're going to take a little bit of engine oil on our finger and just lubricate this seal. Now take the clip, reinstall it onto the hose, and then we will reconnect it to the turbo. Now we can come down here and push it into this holder. Now taking some glass cleaner, we'll just lubricate these grommets so they slide on a little bit easier. We're going to want to grab the oxygen sensor wiring, fish it through this hole, and now reinstall the intake. Once these boots are now slid over, we can firmly press down this air box and make sure that it is properly seated. Now taking the oxygen sensor wiring, we're just going to place it back in the wiring holders. Now taking the oxygen sensor connector, we're going to want to plug each bank back in. Once they're plugged in, we can lower them down into the holder. If your bracket is broken like this, we can use a zip tie to hold this into place. We can now come back with a 6mm socket or a flathead screwdriver and tighten down all of these clamps. We don't want to go too tight with these because it is plastic, but we want to make sure they're nice and snug. Now reinstalling this air duct, you'll see that the passenger side air duct has some grooves that are a little bit clearanced on the inside, and those are going to face the engine. So that's how we can indicate that this is the passenger side air duct. So we're gonna slide this into the air box first before positioning the other side down by the radiator. All right, we're gonna wait to hear that click, give it a little tug. Once that's slid in, we'll see the tab protrude in that little opening there. Now we're going to push back a little bit towards the front of the vehicle and lower this down into place. Now, a little trick here, if you're having a hard time getting these air ducts in, is you can actually pull up on this air box a little bit to give us some more room. We just want to be very careful not to tug on this pipe too hard. Since this is now lifted a little bit, it'll give us a little bit more room to guide that air duct down. Now we can slide this forward and clip it in. Now with the other air duct, repeat the same steps on the driver's side. If you did release the grommets, this is the time to press down on the intake and make sure everything is connected. Now we can take this coolant hose, fish it back over, reinstall the clip, grab a little bit of coolant, wipe it on the seal, and then clip it back onto the coolant reservoir. Now we're going to remove our cardboard protection piece and slide the radiator fan back into place. Guide this down very gently. Be sure to check that it's not tugging on anything. Once this is now lowered down into the engine bay, we're going to line up the clips and press down. Now take this little holder here, open it up, and start putting this coolant hose back into its resting place. And once it's in position, we can tighten this. We're now going to connect the auxiliary water pump back onto the clips for the radiator. Now this is very tight, so we're showing you where it needs to clip in from the top here, and we are going to now reinstall this. Now taking this wiring harness, we will clip the holder back onto the fans. On the passenger side, we'll just take a little bit more fresh coolant, lubricate these fittings, and reconnect the coolant hoses. We're going to take the harness that we routed to the side, reroute it into the engine bay, and start to connect all of the electrical connectors. This one has a lock, so be sure to press the lock back in. Now we can take a clip, put it back on this coolant fitting here, lubricate the seal with our finger, and reconnect it to the radiator. We're going to take our brace here and fish it underneath of this hood cable, slide it underneath this plastic, and clip back in the hood cable. Take this front cross brace and slide it into place. You may need to pull back on the hood latches a little bit to get it to slide in. We're now going to reuse all of the hardware here and thread it all in. We want to keep these a little bit loose right now because we want some play to be able to line everything back up. Using a 16mm socket, we are going to start to snug up all of these bolts, paying attention to aligning it to where it used to sit. One way we can see where it was sitting is the mark of the washer on the actual brace. Torque these 4 bolts to 56 Nm. With a T40 socket, we can now thread all of these bolts in and torque them to 19 Nm. Now we're gonna push all of these wire holders back into their locations on this cross brace. Before reinstalling the engine cover, we'll just take some glass cleaner here and spray down these rubber grommets so this can slide on a little bit more easily. we're just gonna push down, make sure it is sitting nice and flat. Now with both of these strut tower braces for the back, you're going to want to look for this indentation, and that indentation is going to want to face the front of the vehicle. So with the included new one-time use hardware in the kit, we're going to thread these bolts in and tighten all these bolts down. The notched end goes towards the back of the firewall. With an 18mm socket, we're going to just thread these bolts in, come back with our torque wrench and torque them to 56 Newton meters and an additional 90 degrees. Once we've torqued initially to 56 Newton meters, with our angle torque wrench here, we're going to set it to 90 degrees. Now, if you do not have a torque wrench with angle on it, you can always use a Sharpie or a paint pen to mark one end of the bolt and then approximately 90 degrees to mark the body. Now grabbing the other cross braces, we are going to want the step side towards the front cross brace. And we're just going to lay these on here and thread in our hardware. This hardware is also one-time use and is going to be included in this kit. Now taking our torque wrench, we're going to torque these two bolts to 56 Newton meters and then come back with an additional 90 degrees. Now on these front bolts here, we're going to take a E12 socket and torque these to 28 Newton meters. Now we're going to take the driver's side engine bay cover and reinstall it into the vehicle. We can remove this little weather stripping here just to make installation a little bit easier and fish this in. Once this is sitting flush, we can now come back with our plastic rivets and reinstall them. We can now reinstall this weather stripping by taking this groove here and just sliding it over the cowl. We want to tuck it in right here and then just make sure it's all the way pressed down. On the driver's side, we can take the hood cable bracket and clip it back in. Now we can reinstall this weather stripping on the plastic piece. Now we can repeat that process on the passenger side. Now we can take our window washer fluid reservoir cap and clip it back into place. All right, you should be pretty proud of yourself because we just reassembled the vehicle minus the belly pan. At this point, we're going to be filling the low temperature and high temperature coolant circuits. We're going to be using the Zurex HT12 coolant that this BMW X5 takes. We're going to have to mix this coolant to a 50-50 ratio. So we're going to pour the contents of this into a 5-gallon bucket, and then we will put the same amount of distilled water to mix this coolant. We're now going to set up our vacuum fill tool on the high temperature circuit. The system is now pulling all the coolant inside of all the coolant passageways, and then once this is done, we're going to move over to the low temperature circuit. Moving on to the low temperature circuit, we're going to remove this cap here and repeat that same process. Now we can put this cap on, and I'm going to meet you in the car after this to go over the electronic coolant bleeding procedure. This coolant bleed procedure is going to be running for 11 minutes. So if you have a weak battery, it might be a good idea to put it on a charger or use a jump pack when doing this. To start the procedure, we're going to hit this engine start stop button 3 times quickly. Next, we're going to go over to the hazard button and turn that on, and then go over to our headlights and turn on the low beams. Once that's done, we are going to go all the way up on temperature in the cluster here for the HVAC system, and then we are going to turn our fan speed all the way down to the first level. Once that is done, we want to ensure that it is not in the Eco Pro mode, so we're going to hit that comfort button, and now we're going to hold down the accelerator pedal for 10 seconds and the procedure should start. Once that service function has started, you'll see a message on the dash that says service function started. Just a reminder, when doing this bleed procedure, do not touch anything in the car or open any doors, or else the system will stop. Once your service function for bleeding the coolant is complete, you're going to see a message on the dash that says service function finished, and it will make an audible tone. Now let's go back into the engine bay and check the coolant level on both systems, wash it down with some water, and then go underneath to put the belly pan back on. Back underneath the vehicle, we can now reinstall our belly pan and install all of the 8mm screws. And with the belly pan now successfully installed, that wraps up this water pump DIY. If you like what you saw in this video, be sure to hit that like button. And if you have any comments, questions, or concerns, drop them in the comments section below. And if you want to see more videos on the G05 X5 chassis, hit that subscribe button. My name's Cole from FCP Euro. Thanks for watching. Keep on wrenching.